Hello, this here is a short video about an introduction to Taoism, I guess, and specifically to the Tao Te Ching. This is a Hebrew version of it, and this is one of the most famous, most translated books that you probably haven't read. It's a very, very short book. It was written in ancient Chinese, and it's just marvelous, a marvelous read for anyone interested in, I guess, mystic and revelatory and philosophical and poetry, specifically coming from Asia. So I'll give a quick background about this book, and I guess how I think it's a good way to approach it. So this book was written by Lao Tzu. Now Lao Tzu we don't know anything about. We don't know who he was. We just know he operated during a time in ancient Chinese history called the Warring States period. This time was just chaotic beyond anything anyone has ever seen before. I mean, wars like of mass destruction, and in that time different thinkers, just like Confucius, if you know him, they were trying to think of a good way to deal with the state. So during that time, which is about the 6th to the 3rd century BCE, different thinkers, including Lao Tzu, including Confucius and many others, they went from different gardens of different palaces of princes, of leaders, and they were trying to offer and to actually to sell their philosophy. So they would come up and say, listen, if you want to reunite the everything under the sky, reunite the kingdom, listen to me. And this time was just fascinating to read, because you have like these incredible philosophical works emerging in ancient China. And this is one product of them, and it's really important to know this background, because this actually, when you read it in an historical background, you can actually see how this talks back to those ideas that were espoused in the time. And this is actually what I want to tell you about. So just about normal characteristics about this book. This book is actually very, very short. It's just 81 chapters, just a little more than 5,000 words, and it's just very, very minimalist in its style and in its message, and it's really hard to read without getting confused. Even in the first line, goes something like, the Tao that can be spoken of is not the eternal Tao. Now in ancient Chinese, this is also a very cool pun. They actually say the Tao that can be Taoed is not the eternal Tao. So because Tao, this is very important if you want to know about Taoism. So Tao actually means the way, but it also means to speak. So the Tao that can be spoken, the Tao that can be Taoed, is not the eternal Tao. Now Tao, this is a very difficult word, and this is actually why this book is so difficult to read, because it just talks about the Tao that you can't speak of. So it just tries to tell you about an idea that you can't tell about, and this is just like the immense irony. You just feel like reading this book, you can, what am I reading? Like, it's very, very confusing, very fast. And actually, I think if you read it in a historical context, it can actually make sense in the sense that you can actually see how it talks, how it relates to different notions of what Tao meant. So for Tao, for Confucius and others, meant living a moral life according to the state. I believe this term of Tao, as the Taoists, as Lao Tzu, the first Taoist, define it, is a Tao that is actually nature itself. So nature, and this is, we can see in the entire book, is filled with metaphors of rivers and metaphors of valleys and nothingness and eternal and emptiness. And this actually gives you the sense that the way to live is the way of nature. And the way of nature is eternal. The way of nature is bigger. Right? If the man is here, right, and the state is here, then nature is much bigger than all of that. It just surrounds all of it. So actually, when you read this book, you get a sense that it's nature that is the best way, the best guide we have to living a moral life. And according to Lao Tzu, at least, the way he seems to describe nature, it seems to be a nature which is passive, a nature that doesn't just lets everything flow. And this is why Taoism is actually the basis of martial arts like Tai Chi, right? The Tai Chi, you just let everything flow. The energy is passive. You just turn it back and you don't do anything active. And this book talks all about it. And the way I suggest one reads this book is actually take into consideration 4 main elements. The first, like philosophically, the first being the philosophy, the metaphysics of it. So how this Tao is related to nature. Okay, so really think about that. The second question I would ask is how this term Tao, which is inherent to nature, actually disputes even the notion of needing a language to live a moral life, which is very extreme, especially for Westerners, to think that you can actually live a moral life without speaking, because we live on the notion of the logos, of the spoken word and the written word. And this book, although it's a book, does argue that, you know, words are just ways that make us have like false notions of what reality is and what a good life is. And this actually is a way to refute also the thinkers back in Lao Tzu's day, back in the Warring States period, right? Because if you say, you know, words are just a really bad way of understanding reality, there's no like the way people use the term good and evil, they depend on one another. They are relative, they are changing. So by saying that, by arguing that language is really a bad tool for humans to use for a good life, he's actually refuting, he's actually arguing against all the other thinkers of his time. So I guess that's the other thing I would look at. The third thing I would look at the mysticism. Although people have trouble with this term, I do think there is a strong sense of mysticism to this book. It's full of paradoxes, and it's just like, it gives you the sense of awe. People actually talk about it like it's been like, to read this book is like having a sort of meditation. And I think mysticism does capture a wide aspect of it that simple philosophy just simply doesn't. And there does seem to feel like passivity. Passivity is a term very, very familiar to notions of mysticism, like William James has argued. So I would definitely think of a way this book is mystic, although not entirely, but in some ways it is. And the first part, I would look at the politics of the time. So as I said, this is in a context where wars are raging, leaders need guidance, and this book talks specifically to the leader, to the king, to the person it's intended to is actually the person who needs to lead the state. But it also talks to the human being and the way to live a life that is not full of possessions, it's not full of material goods, which is just a way to bring unnecessary suffering to life. And so if you have to really summarize the message of this book, I would say it's something like understanding that words are not the best tool to live a moral life, and the way to live a good life is actually by imitating nature's way of just passively existing in a world that is not dictated by notions of good and bad, but simply existing in and just not causing unnecessary suffering. And this, it can be achieved, I guess, by emptying the notions that we've all had to live by our entire lives. So anyway, fascinating read. If you're interested in Taoism, definitely check this book out. And if even not, this is just a book that really can change one's life. So definitely Tao Te Ching, The Way. So definitely check it out. So yeah.